Hello, everyone. My name is Kirk Arthur with Microsoft, and we are so excited to present to you today on this panel discussion, From Crisis to Opportunity, Transforming European Cities in the COVID Era. These have been incredible times over the last 8 months, and we have such a distinguished panel today to discuss their experiences and best practices and everything that's been going on where technology has a role to play. So we're excited. I want to start off by introducing Dr. Julia Glidden from Microsoft. Julia, if you want to introduce yourself.
Thanks, Kirk, and thanks to my esteemed panelists. I have the privilege and honor of leading Microsoft's worldwide public sector efforts, and particularly leading those efforts in conjunction with so many of you throughout the darkest days of the COVID crisis. And we hope they were the darkest days. We were just talking before we came online about the recent surges, and we're all optimistic for a vaccine. But I wanted to say, despite all the difficulties, the stress, the strain, the pressures, the unprecedented crisis we've been living through, I think there's one statement that is truly true, that in the darkest hour when the world needed the power of smart technologies the most, the smart technologies and those of us that have dedicated our careers to advancing them delivered. You know, Satya said that he saw more digital transformation in 2 months than in 2 years. I think all of us in the public sector can say we saw more transformation in 2 months than in 20 years, as we saw innovation barriers come down at rates that were once unthinkable. For the simple fact that because in a notoriously risk-averse sector like public sector, the risk of doing nothing for the first time ever became exponentially greater than the risk of doing something. And those of us that have been investing in smart technologies, investing in the power of cloud-enabled data and AI to bring, to improve services, to make lives happier, to unleash innovation, we're able to harness this work and deliver it to those most in need. Satya talked about technology companies being the digital responders to the first responders. And for me, it was a truly humbling experience to see the way in which technology enabled us to stay in contact with police and public safety officials, to protect through innovations like HoloLens, public healthcare workers, to keep schools open, to keep students at their desks, to keep the public safe, to literally keep the fabric of civil society together. And so I'm really honored and humbled to be part of this panel today, to share with you those experiences, and more importantly, to learn from you and to learn from my panelists who have really been in the trenches to understand what they've seen and witnessed. So with that, I just want to start what I hope, what I know, what I believe is going to be a great discussion.
Great, fantastic. Thank you, Julia. Theo, maybe have you introduced yourself to the audience?
Certainly. It's great to be here. My name's Theo Blackwell. I'm the Chief Digital Officer for London. I've been in post for 3 years, and I'm responsible for data and innovation, smart cities, and digital transformation at a strategic level.
Great, fantastic. Thank you, Theo. And Philip.
Hello, my name is Philip Boutelier. I'm the CEO of Tegel Project. We've just closed our international airport a week ago, and my team and I are responsible for converting the whole land, which is roughly 5 square kilometers, into a hub for future technologies, in particular for urban tech. So I'm kind of the institutionalized risk taker in Berlin and the innovator. And Julia's excellent introduction pointed towards barriers coming down at unprecedented speeds, and that is true for us as well. So, but that's something we can discuss about later.
Thank you, Philip. And Fernando.
Good afternoon. I am the Director of the Digital Office of Madrid City Hall. This is a new office created by the mayor in this political mandate. I just applied for this position 3 months ago, so I am brand new. I am happy in this city in this moment. But before that, I was the CIO of the central government in Spain, as responsible for the building blocks of digital government. In my new responsibility, I deal with the process of fostering digital transformation in Madrid, in both the city and the internal town hall, the strategy of and the strategy of data.
Fantastic. Thank you, Fernando. And Marius.
Hello, everyone. My name is Marius Silvestersen. I'm heading up the Copenhagen Solutions Lab, which is the kind of X-Lab for smart city and digital innovation here in the city of Copenhagen. And I guess I'm really looking forward to the discussion here today. My speciality and our speciality is actually to bridge between the public and the private sector and find these common grounds of collaboration in order to combat some of these bigger urban challenges that we're facing today, including the COVID-19, of course.
Great, fantastic. So as you can see, we have an incredible panel with incredible experience. So I'm going to ask the first question around digital transformation. And maybe Theo, I'll start with you with the question, but we've seen rapid innovation and digital transformation throughout the current crisis. What have you been seeing in London? And then how did the attitudes towards risk and change altered or changed itself?
Well, thank you. That's a really important question. And I think we alluded to it before. The immediate response to the crisis saw an accelerated roadmap in all of our city's digital transformation programs. Of course, London is, I look at it from a city hall perspective. There's a municipal layer below me of 32 boroughs, each serving an average population of 250,000 people. So they were at various stages from a sort of pre-transformation through to really quite advanced operations. So typically we saw 95% of the workforce being able to work remotely. So almost, all that needed to work remotely, working remotely. And, for us at City Hall, it basically brought forward a program that we're expected to complete over the next 9 months to a year into about 10 days. So we completed that, and that was, I think, quite a significant achievement. I think there are probably another couple of aspects. There was a real focus on our ability to digest real-time information to ensure that London was okay during the crisis. And again, that posed certain challenges. We were good at some things, and other areas we recognise we need to improve. Those parts of the organisations that had embedded digital teams were able to respond and spin up services and responses much more effectively than others. And they were also enabled not so much to roll out. I mean, there are examples of us rolling out new services very quickly, but also realises that those services that existed already could be repurposed in order to meet the crisis. So I would say the presence of those digital teams, often quite small digital teams, had a inordinate impact. And certainly is a lesson that I can take back as a case for further investment in the future.
Great, thank you, Theo. And Marius, from your perspective, same question.
So I really like what Theo was saying on the issue of real-time data. So I guess the immediate response was to manage and steer control this situation, but the next level, the next step was actually to understand how did we want our citizens to behave during this pandemic situation. So we basically wanted people to meet outside because that would be the same way of socializing, and you need some level of socializing in a society. So we more or less tried to make it as easy as possible to use the outdoor urban environment. For instance, we used the parking spaces as serving areas. So if you had a small restaurant or cafe, you could actually use the parking space in front of your shop or your restaurant to cater to your customers. One of the difficulties we're facing here is it's actually, so having people meeting outside is good, but we don't want them to congregate in too large numbers or intersection between groups. We wanted to keep them separate. So how do you do that? We have been trying to really map out, so our green areas, trying actually to map them out in a grid so as to make certain that people don't mix up too much between the groups. That is one way of going about it, but that's pretty analog. That's not really moving this problem into the digital world. So now we're looking into what would be the possibilities of opportunities for actually finding out how people are moving about in the cityscape, what areas of the city would there be and stuff like that. It's quite difficult to get real-time information on that. And of course, there's a privacy issue that lies very closely to our heart as well. But we are looking at a very difficult data challenge, getting real-time data on the way people are behaving in our urban environments.
Yeah, fantastic perspective. And I live in the Seattle area, and we saw, civic governments really trying to help local businesses, cordoning off the parking spaces so you could have outdoor dining so they can at least have some revenue stream, which is so critical to everyone's economies. Philip, maybe your perspective.
Yeah, in a way, what we are currently living through is a blessing in disguise. I mean, of course, we are all horrified by COVID, but when we had the first lockdown in March here in Berlin, it was a complete disaster. About 5% of administrators had a laptop. So basically, public services came to a halt. And now we have advanced at an unprecedented speed. So there's nothing as valuable as a well-used crisis, if you like. And that's exactly what's happening right now. I mean, our organization was digital from day one. So it took us about 12 hours to reorganize a bit of stuff, and we went completely virtual. That was easy. But this poor infrastructure is so detrimental. And of course, as public servants, and we have a responsibility to our citizens. And I think we have failed big time. So it's time to catch up.
That's an interesting perspective, Philip. Thank you. And Fernando, in Spain?
Yes, yes. Crisis as opportunity, real, but crisis as opportunity. Of course, we need to rewrite possibly all the report about indicator in the advance of the digital transformation and the digital life in all the countries. But the crisis has been horrible because of the problem of the lives and the business. The crisis, in fact, has been a driver for digital transformation. And in this case in Spain, the government confined us in March, and from that moment we have to recover all the administration working not in face-to-face but in internet. So public administration has to face some challenges. The first is that our public employees working at home, not as a pilot. The same problem that everybody has had. Perhaps with some problem with cybersecurity. I don't know if in your case has been so, but in Spain has been attacked, and in some cases in public administrations, hospitals, and so on. The second and important in our case that all the government was only electronic government, so digital by the default, digital by design, by only digital, and this is very important. Why? Because we have to take care of some citizens and all people that don't have the possibility to interact with public administration on internet. So care with digital device. This is very important in all these crises, because not only we are living in the large cities, but we need to think in people living in rural areas. What happened with the people that don't have IT infrastructures? And of course, we have other things to do. We need to adapt the public services to the new situation. So we need to adapt every day, transport, health, security.
Oh, I think we lost Fernando. Fernando, we've lost audio with you.
For once, it's not me in rural New England.
Unfortunately, and I don't think he knows he's lost audio, but Julia, you have a unique perspective leading Microsoft's worldwide public sector, and seeing the full impact around the world of technology and where it's come in, based on the feedback from the other panelists, what's your perspective on the transformation we've seen?
I'm really struck by the commonalities, and I was just talking on a panel with the OECD folks that I've been working with for 20 years in this space, and the technology challenges, the technology needs that have arisen during this period of crisis are universal. And the common things that we have seen, to your point, Theo, is, one of my friends at the UN and I joke that back 10 years ago, we would mention cloud at a forum like this and people would be like, what are you talking about the weather? Right? It wasn't a technology. People didn't know what we were talking about. We were trying to get public administrators to talk to us and to think about this new technology. And what we saw during the crisis now is those early evangelists that did forge ahead, that did put digital teams in place, that, London, of course, is a leader. I lived 20 years in London. It was such a privilege to see its digital explosion, right? And become the hub that it is. And the same in Berlin and in Barcelona for my years in Europe. But those early investments, the early evangelizers really laid down the foundation that the whole world drew upon throughout this crisis. Every city, every organization had a challenge with not being ready for remote. And everybody saw the remote rollout plans. Canada's shared services saw the plan, a 3-year plan, happen over a weekend, which is pretty phenomenal. At the same time, Sao Paulo was able to use technology to help the homeless have access to fast food restaurants when they weren't crowded, so that we were getting supply and demand right, and helping women that were in domestic abusive situations and environments have chatbots, personalized chatbots, people they could talk to, and then access to helplines. So from rolling out remote work to actually helping societies most vulnerable and at need, we saw technology in an ubiquitous way roll out to rise to the challenges. And it really was thanks to the early evangelists. And I stress that theme so much during my interventions today, because of course the Smart City Expo itself, I think it's its 11th year anniversary, I'm dating myself, has been so much a part of that early wave that has enabled every part of the world to harness technology throughout the crisis. I mean, living in rural New England, where my internet is patchy at best, there's still a lot of work to be done. But I do think this is a time for us to step back and also celebrate.
Fantastic. Thank you, Julia. Fernando, I don't know, do we have you back? I think he's still on. Oh, you're
Yes.
on mute. There you are.
Welcome back.
Excuse me, I have problems with my sound. Yes, technology has been very important, has been critical. There are some people that say that the physical globalization could be affected in negative, but virtual globalization has been affected in positive. So are going to be virtual globalization. Well, in our case, and I think in all your case, the technology has shown us the possibilities for us to maintain our life. There were problems in some cases with the people saying that he's moving to cloud, but in our case, infrastructure has been very stressed in all our countries, and we needed quality of service.
Oops. I think we lost him again. Okay, let's we'll transition to the second question. And Philip, I think I'm going to start with you, but we've seen governments take great strides forward in using digital approaches to improve both their operations as well as their service delivery. And I want to maybe pivot a little bit on IoT and artificial intelligence. And so how can we build an ethical and reliable AI and IoT that really respects human and social values while also improving city services and the well-being of the people and community that you're looking after?
Man, Kirk, you don't ask easy questions.
No, these are big ones.
Was it at me or at Theo?
Yeah, Philip, it was for you.
Yeah, no, fine.
No luck passing that over.
That's something we've been thinking about a lot lately, because the way data is handled currently in let's say in different cultures is very close to a dystopian version of our future. That's exactly what we don't want to see, and that's why we tend to say we want to develop sort of the our European answer to how we deal with IoT and data. And we are working on open data systems, on interoperable systems. We are collaborating, even Microsoft is opening up, which is a little surprise. So it's the new Microsoft. It's the new Microsoft, Julia.
My word.
So everybody in the industry is recognizing finally that we all win greatly if we build upon common standards, and that we take privacy issues very seriously. And that's something we are working on with our project as well. So with a critical view on a fantastic project, I think, sort of what Sidewalks tried to achieve in Toronto. There was only this one mistake about how to handle data. All the rest was fantastic. The participation, some of the technological solutions, they were all spot on. And I really loved the team, and they did a great job there. But that was a demonstration sort of how critical this issue is. So when we talk about open data and critical infrastructures in Berlin, it's always with this view on how can we make sure that we can preserve our digital sovereignty as citizens and protect privacy as good as we can. And of course, I mean, you need reliable cloud infrastructure. That's a no-brainer. It's so obvious these days. And still, some administrators, they love their servers, you know, and they think they can do better. And it's somewhat arcane what we see there in technical. The technical mindset, basically, that's hindering innovation. So I see a stride forward, big companies coming together, working on mutual standards, which is extremely important. And I can't stress often enough sort of how important sort of security issues are in this new world, and preservation of privacy is.
Yeah, maybe that's a good segue to just kind of an open question to the group. When you think about public-private partnerships, especially around cybersecurity, because it's everyone's challenge and problem, what's that look like for the group here? And just anyone chime in, but what's that look like from the partnership, but also from a cybersecurity lens, because we're better together when everyone's working to combat this. So I'd love the panel's feedback.
Can I just jump in, having worked in this
Absolutely,
for so many years? I'm hoping the panelists, when you say public-private partnership, the first thing you don't think is failed contracts that cost more and under-deliver.
I hope not, no.
No, I'm very happy for the others to answer this, but we take a very pragmatic approach on it. Basically, we do not have the capabilities as public entities. We don't have the programmers you need for it. So we do collaborate, of course, and we need big corporations to support us in this effort, but sort of on equal terms, if you like. So it's kind of it's a different form of partnership than we saw in the 90s. And that's a very good sign.
Yeah,
it's fun, actually.
Marius, your perspective.
Thank you. I really like what you're saying, Philip. This is mandatory to work with the private sector. If you're a public entity, we don't have the innovative power. We haven't got the data scientists. We haven't got the technology and the infrastructure. So we really need to be skilled at building these partnerships. I think it's very important when you're building partnerships that you make certain that it's not technology that is in the driver's seat. It should really be the public sector problem. It should be the urban challenges that we are facing globally. So I think we need to be tough negotiators working with the big tech, and I have a couple of examples that this can be actually quite fruitful. I guess also for the private sector, they really get a deeper understanding of what their technology and what their data can do if they get closer involved in what goes on city level or nation state level. So I really find this public-private partnerships to be a segue to solving some of these difficult problems. So I'm really all for it.
Fantastic.
Yeah, we mentioned Toronto Sidewalks. I think privately, a lot of city CDOs, when they heard that when they heard it first announced 3 or 4 years back, sort of viewed it privately, probably with an element of concern that they didn't want smart cities to be cast in the light of essentially a quite dominant private sector partnership on an area of your city. I know it was a small district in Toronto, and it's been described in various ways, but I see the future as and in a sense that kind of went into one of the criticisms of the traditional smart city approach, that it was quite solutionist rather than building bottom up. And whether that's a fair characterization of the Toronto the sidewalks approach, I should say, or not, that was certainly how it was reflected and how it was received for people in positions like me. So if I was developing a smart city initiative, I would get challenged. Oh, are you doing something like Toronto's doing? Or even if you say you're not, that's probably your intention. So I thought that it was probably like unhelpful that some of the consequences of that discussion. I think the future is more sort of purpose-led partnerships. So, for example, if we want to do a partnership with a company over tackling air quality in London, or solving a congestion problem, that's where I think quite a lot of the potential lies, rather than looking at this as purely like a place-based construct.
Yeah, great. Fernando, your thoughts? Can you hear us, Fernando?
Maybe I could jump in when we wait to get Fernando back on. And Theo, if I could just implore you and Amaris and Philippe, all of you, to please keep echoing that message about mission outcome. I loved it. I just wrote down purpose-led partnership.
Yes.
Technology companies love to sell their products, and they love to sell their gizmos and gadgets. And if I could ask you to just keep reinforcing the message that's just a means to an end, and the end is a better society for us all, a more livable urban environment with smart cities. Fernando, are you back?
Yes. Yes, in our case, we have a large tradition of cooperation between the sector, private and public. I think it's very important that everybody share the same rules. More than 10 years ago, we developed a national interoperability framework and national security framework. So we, both public and private companies, share the same type of rules, the same type of protection. So we really have trust in this type of collaboration. As everybody knows, and you told in other cities, in some cases, the public administration don't have the personal profiles or the flexibility that we need to begin new projects. So for us, it's very important. And taking about the data, it's true that the people, at least in Spain, has a lot of interest about their use of the personal data protection, and they were always question about where is their data. They could question for their data. For us, it's very important the traceability of administrative decision using this data, and in some cases depends on every country, because the acceptance of the use of the data is not the same in China, the United States, and in Europe, or any other country. I think that is very important. When we are talking about data, we could provide personalized services, is true, but also we need to balance between the privacy and the personal services. And I think this is the key point in our case.
Yeah, Fernando, I think that's a great call. And really everyone, when we think about, with like 5G technology coming along, edge analytics, edge processing, IoT, it's a huge opportunity for cities to really deliver comprehensive services to the citizens. But on the back end, it's that security posture and working with the private sector. And two words that came up for you is privacy and trust and partnership that you guys mentioned. I think that's core and foundational to the private sector, is not violating that and working shoulder to shoulder to combat this strong issue. So let me kind of pivot that conversation to one click further. When I think about this crisis, there were certain governments around the world that were prepared because they had a digital posture, a little more mature. Others weren't quite as ready, and we saw services come down. And Julia, I was maybe going to start with you, just from your perspective, what you saw as the COVID crisis took a foothold around the world, where we saw governments, challenged and constrained, but how they started to adopt cloud technology and some of the feedback we've received as a company.
Well, Kirk, it's what I said in my introductory remarks. As someone that's devoted my whole career to digital innovation, it was a historic time to be working in this sector because the barriers to innovation, to cloud adoption, to deployment of things that in the private sector are taken for granted, in the public sector were still relatively new, like remote working, literally came down at an unprecedented rate. But we also have seen just as quickly the national barriers start to come back up around these issues we've been discussing: data protection and privacy. So, it's almost in the same way the physical borders went up. We're now starting to see the borders come up around data because the handling of data during the crisis, whether it's track and trace or, we were talking to a French parliamentarian this morning about drones and facial recognition to see if people were in the right places or congregating at the right, or, in too many people in any one place. And we talked about that need in Copenhagen, Marius. A lot of issues have come up now around trust and use of data. So we've seen amazing opportunities. I gave some examples of, getting food to the homeless and access to fast food restaurants, or people that were living in abusive relationships, access to help. I mean, there's a lot of things we're able to do through innovation when the barriers came down, but there's also a lot of concerns that have been raised about our use of data. Citizens' concerns about the way in which our data is being used. And so we're in this kind of twilight zone where the genie's out of the bottle. We've tasted innovation, we've seen the potential, but it's a tale of two cities because we've seen the potential for good, but we've also seen the potential for misuse. And I think that, we need to, all of us, think about this as an inflection point in what the next step is. And I think it begins by privacy-preserving technologies, privacy as a fundamental human right, privacy by design, because it's only by guaranteeing privacy that you will ultimately earn trust, which is the foundational component for innovation, in my opinion. It's trust, not technology, that we need to really make the next great leap forward coming out of the crisis.
Fantastic. Thanks, Julia. And Marius, I'd love your perspective on this.
Sure. So I guess it's a real nice extreme case, this COVID-19, because there's really a need for technology and a need for using data in the most efficient manner possible. But still people are shying away from using even official apps for combating the infection of COVID-19 because people don't really trust big tech or trust government. So trust is really a key issue here. And I would love to turn the discussion around. So what could we do as public sector representatives and as private sector representatives in order to earn that trust back? Because it's really a barrier for solving these major challenges that we haven't really got. We haven't really got the deep trust from the community around the world that we are able to either from the private sector to collect this data or from the public sector perspective to use this data in a reliable and privacy-driven manner. So we should really take that very seriously and work at it from both parts of public-private divide.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. And Theo, go ahead, Fernando.
Yes. Yes, I agree with you. Anyway, I think it depends about the social acceptance of the question. In some cases, in Spain, for example, has been some controversy about the apps. We have developed several apps for self-diagnosis or for travel. We have, but the main controversy was about the tracing apps. That I think it was general in other countries. And well, it's important that the people have trust in the use that we are going to make with their data. But it's important also the social acceptance, because what is possible for our society perhaps is not possible for other society. It happens with the balance between economy and health. It is other question that we are talking continually. If we are organizing a total lockdown, or it's better to mix economy and health. And it's the same with in my opinion, with the health and privacy in the case of apps and other collecting of data, for example, of artificial intelligence, biometry. And in my opinion, it's very important the government campaign about the trust in the system, because it's different, the trust or the social acceptance in the case of one country or other, or even in the case of young people or old people, or even in our case from a moment of our life and the next moment of our life. So I think it's very important this. Anyway, around artificial intelligence, around the use of big data, I think we are going to need a new collection of digital rights acts, because it's very clear that there are a lot of people thinking on this with different vision, and finally public administration must follow some rules. And I think finally we need an act about digital rights, and the thing is possible to do, the things is not possible to do.
Great, thanks, Fernando. And to me, it's an interesting dichotomy, because people are so willing to put so much information on apps just for social purposes, but really reluctant with the governments. And so it's kind of baffled me a bit at times. So Theo, I'd love your perspective in London on this topic as well.
Well, I mean, I think first on the question of people's views about privacy, I think it's important, and certainly what we've learned from talking to people is that there's not a homogenous view about privacy, and certainly not as homogenous as some of the more forceful privacy advocates would, effectively would like. A large majority of people are in the zone where they will happily countenance a trade-off. If they get a benefit, they're willing to give their data, and this also includes, in our discussions around people's medical data. If people feel that it supports the National Health Service or supports social care or can enhance our understanding of the impacts of poor air quality, then under certain circumstances, people are willing to do that. And there are some people who are more concerned about it, and other people who are more willing to give it away. So there are different personas on privacy in our own city. So in London, we conducted a listening tour to create our Smarter London roadmap. Told us two things: that we should put people first when we design technology. So that is design principles when we do things rather than solutionism. And we should also do things like fix the plumbing. So get the basics right, sort out broadband, make sure digital services are good and accessible. And, that sort of takes us slightly away from the hype cycle, but that's kind of what people wanted. But we do know that new technologies are going to drop in our city, and our studies show, we're all centers of digital excellence, and we all know that there are new technologies coming down the road, and the advanced technology infrastructure that 5G and artificial intelligence will give rise to augmented reality and immersive reality and robotics, and we'll see a difference in our city with smart machinery and smart logistics. A more clickable, interactive city than we had before. These things will happen in our cities maybe over the next decade or 15 years. So we're looking at how we can bring together our collective experience of what we have so far through an emerging tech charter for London. So it's not a regulation, we can't lay a regulation, but we can say to innovators and say to the public sector, here are the principles, here's the understanding of what we've learned so far about how you should prototype something. Here are the design principles that we use in one place that might be applicable to you in another. Here are some standards around how you should collect and maintain data. including our suggestion that if you do have an emerging technology that's public facing in our city, that your legal requirement to publish your data privacy impact assessment should be shared with the city, so we can have them in one place, so there can be transparency about the impact of data. And I don't think that's onerous on innovators, but it meets what the public are telling us, that in a sense that that there's a question about what's going on, what's the kind of black box technology here. And so there's a step and a challenge for people to say, this is how the technology works, and this is how your rights are protected. So that's something that we're doing now, and we obviously welcome everyone and anyone's comments on that. We'll publish that shortly.
Fantastic.
Yes, I totally agree that in this point the key is transparency, and in some cases there are no enough transparency, because public administration wonder how our people have trust in the social networks. And in some cases, when public administration are using the same type of data, they have a lot of worry about the use of this type of data. And I think the trust is very important, and the transparency about the use of this data is a key point. You were talking about new emerging technologies, artificial intelligence, and of course, in the case of public administration, at least in Spain, is not only the case of the use of data or big data about AI, but we have other cases about the traceability of the administrative decisions when you are using techniques of artificial intelligence. In some cases, it's difficult how to explain an administrative decision. So the people want to know how has been the algorithm decision. It's not easy to express that there is an algorithm decision, what was the result of an administrative procedure, for example. So this is a very important issue in our case, the traceability of all the administrative decision using some emerging technologies.
Great, thanks, Fernando. I want to jump to just focus on economic stimulus. In Microsoft, we recently announced digital skills for 25 million people, just to try and get them, people that have been really impacted by the COVID crisis. And Philip, maybe I'll start with you, but what kind of digital initiatives are you embarking on within your community there to kind of stimulate economic recovery as we come out of the pandemic?
I'd actually like to say one more or two more words to the discussion we just had, because I think it's of fundamental importance. We have a European panel here, and some American elements in it. And I've spent a lot of time in the Valley, and this is a sort of a deep cultural thing. Sort of our fight for privacy and defense of privacy is deeply rooted in our specific histories. In Germany, we had Hitler, then in the GDR, the Stasi, very oppressive system, regime. We had Franco, we had, all sorts of idiots around, and they all used information. They gathered information and abused this information against their own populations. And that's sort of the root of the distrust that we have as populations or as Europeans against governments in principle. And what we had to witness the last 4 years in America was pretty shocking, sort of how one administration sort of could challenge fundamental democratic institutions. It was so frail. And we were really shocked to see how Trump simply abused the system. And we are so glad that this is coming to an end now, so that you can finally close the ranks against with civilized societies. So I just wanted to point that out again, because sometimes we have these discussions, why are you Europeans so concerned about privacy issues and data, and why is there so much distrust against your governments? That's because of our history. We know what it means when governments abuse information. So I think yes.
Don't underestimate the distrust of government in the United States. The much loathed Donald Trump is an expression of that distrust. So I would say, I think I think we have much more in common as people concerned about our privacy. How our institutions reflect that is very different. And the challenge we have in the United States is and as somebody who's got dual citizenship and spent most of my life in Europe, I'm very partial to this issue, because the challenge is that the tech companies are based in the United States. And so that opens up, and innovation at scale was unleashed during an era of mass globalization that I would argue is coming to an end. And we're starting to see, you know, the autarchical barriers come back up, fundamentally changing business models and creating, I think, a pressure and a need and a demand within Europe for the counterpart to those tech companies that we all have to grasp. You know, how do we maintain the benefits of hyperscale cloud computing and the investments made over 20 years with the countervailing desire that our data is held and controlled locally? Are there new models we can do in partnership and in collaboration together? Or you know, is it a separation? I mean, I think these are pretty fundamental issues of our time. But I just kind of wanted to throw in there that there's a pretty fundamental distrust on this side of the pond as well.
Thank you, Julia. That's a very, very good point. And I'm glad to hear that, because I think in the end, it's that company that cracks this challenge, basically, that will make the race. Because it's on a value base, and that's sort of much deeper than any rational decision process in tendering public tenders that we have here. So when it comes to stimulus programs, the European Union has just set up a new budget. It's roughly 750 billion that's going into infrastructure investments, and 250 billion of those are earmarked towards green solutions, sustainable solutions. Our commission has announced a new Green Deal, and that, I mean, apart from the fact that two not so democratic European countries are currently blocking this budget, but that's a different story. In principle, it's a beautiful story, particularly when it comes to the challenges that we face as cities ahead. Because if we want to become carbon neutral by 2050, we have a hell of a lot of work to do. And sort of my motto in this discussion is we need radical digitalization in order to fix that. We can't fix the climate challenge without technology. Why? Because people are just the way they are. You know, I'm also a social scientist, amongst other things, and I'm sorry to say we haven't changed that much over the last few hundred years. So. Do I believe in the good in people? Yes, on an individual level, but not on a collective level. So we are very good at destroying the stuff that we have in our responsibility, and we need technology to if we want to maintain our level of living style, or even increase it, while at the same cutting down on carbon emissions dramatically. Only technology can help us to do that, to achieve that. And that will be a fantastic, phenomenal growth opportunity. And I think we are all working for the same end goal here, and that is to save our planet.
Yeah, and Philip, you transitioned to sustainability. Maybe we'll stay on this topic because, you know, Microsoft, we've committed to be carbon neutral by 2030, and we see other
carbon negative.
Yeah, carbon negative to that point. Even our campus in the Bay Area being, you know, not using any water, we're collecting everything. So we're making huge investments in that space. With the crisis, and maybe Theo, I'll flick it over to you, but with the crisis and sustainability goals, has that hindered, paused, accelerated efforts in London?
Well, I think it's certainly accelerated. I mean, in common with our colleagues in Europe, who have a very substantial green stimulus, the Mayor of London has set out a part of his recovery plan to double the size of the green economy. So we see this as a massive sector of new jobs, and of course technology plays a role there. We've got particular expertise in mobility services. We've just launched a live connected autonomous vehicle living lab in Greenwich in London, where there's about several kilometers of live road, like real life road with sort of British roundabouts and things like that, where cars and mobility services can be tested. Now, I see mobility as actually a key part of this, of meeting this challenge. In terms of a kind of wider stimulus, I really do think, and it's sort of an obvious point, but actually bringing forward planned investment in digital infrastructure is something that we could probably do now. 20% of all fiber build in the UK is currently in London, because we've created the foundations for that private investment, and soon we'll have more when we use our public assets as sort of slingshots for more fiber and potentially in the end 5G investment into areas of London that the market hasn't deemed viable. So I think that, in the language of stimulus, we need to think about that digital infrastructure in the same way that we think about, Green New Deal and how we're going to move forward with that. Now's the time to do it.
Yes.
Thanks, Theo. And Marius.
Yes. Excuse me, because I lose the sound now and then. You were talking about the economy, and I have the opportunity now. Yes, of course, digital transformation are accelerating the future. So we are going to advance the problems of the future. We are going to advance the problem of the automation, the new jobs, the needs to reskill or upskilling of our labor force. These are going to be a very important issue. The discussion is not now health or economy, because we need health to have an economy. One problem of all our cities is, of course, we are big cities. We have density of population, high level of movements. We have half of communications, very good variables for the economy, but they are not so good enough to fight the COVID. So, the future, we are going to invest. Of course, we need to have funds. We are going to attract tech companies. That's true. But I think they are going to be very important, the good use of the European funds. I remember the previous crisis. And the European solution for the previous crisis was austerity. In this moment, it's investment, and this is very, very important for us. So we need to take advantage of all of these funds and investment in digital, social, inclusive, and green. I think it's very, very important, the collaboration between the public and private sector to take advantage of this to prepare the future. But at the same time, I think it's very important to prepare the future for all the labor forces, because automation are going to accelerate this process of change of the type of work. And everybody talks about a new social contract or something like that, because the main worry about the people in this moment is the jobs. So we need to take this in account. We are going to invest in technology. Of course, technology means automation, of course, but we need to take care about what is the main worry about the people, that is the jobs.
Yeah, fantastic. And Julia, go ahead, Julia, then I'll turn to Marius.
I can't have a discussion about sustainability without hearing from my beloved Copenhagen, because you're at the forefront of so much of what's happening there. Marius, I knew you were trying to jump in. Just would love to hear from you.
Thanks, Julia. So I guess here in Denmark and Copenhagen, so of course we have stimulus packages around COVID-19, of course, but I guess green transition is really a strong driver for economic development as well still. So many of the packages that we're looking into is actually around the green transition. And I guess having been working with the intersection between the climate goals and the digital space has given us some interesting insights in how these two spaces would collaborate also in the future. I guess on a city level, we are commissioned to the goal of becoming carbon neutral by 2025, and I guess we're going to my good friend Jørgen is working around the clock to reach that goal, and we've been doing that for 10 or 15 years now. And I guess back in the days when we commissioned this goal, it seemed to be far ahead in the future, and now it's actually in a few years' time. So of course it's getting increasingly difficult. We started off reforming the energy system, and I wouldn't say it was easy, but it was doable. And now we're really looking into mobility. And mobility, it's much more complicated because we need to make certain that people can move about in our cities. And actually, on a political level, we just decided to close down the inner city, the older part of Copenhagen for cars. So that would be really a driver for change, how to move people, how to move goods in and out of the city center without using cars. So I guess some of these challenges that lies within the green transformation would be drivers for economic prosperity and for building new technologies. And we really try to get that mechanism to work, so we don't just like put money into COVID, but put money into companies that are actually solving some of the long-term problems that we are facing in the cities today.
Fantastic, Marius. And we have 5 minutes left, and I've been truly humbled by this discussion, and everyone's experience has been fantastic. So, Julia, I was going to maybe have you kind of close out the session, just kind of wrap up in your perspective.
I think rather than, I've done a lot of the talking. I think on the OECD discussion we had this morning, we said, if there's one thing that I'd like to hear from the panelists, just one sentence that you feel technology, or what you're going to personally do as we work in this technology field to make the world better coming out of COVID. My pledge this morning was to make sure that we keep the humanity, the human touch in all that we do, and we don't let technology become the end goal. I just wanted to throw it out to this amazing panel. What's your pledge?
Yeah, maybe Fernando first.
It's okay. Only to finish. Technology are going to be very important. Are going to be the key, as you say. Human technology for human targets. Technology is the tool, and our target is other things. I think to finish, I think we need to convert what has been current and temporary changes to structural and permanent changes. I need, in our discussion has been a key point, we need to increase transparency, participation, co-creation and co-design of services. Why? Because people want to participate in all the decisions that we are taking, the political and administrative organization. I think we must take advantage of all of these change in technology to increase digital capabilities of our population. I think this is very, 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 very important. And to finish, take advantage of the European funds and collaboration and cooperation. It's very important. We are facing a global problem, and we can't solve this global problem with local solution. I was thinking before about the tracing app, but the people in Europe travel to some countries. Spain is a tourist country, so we need to cooperate between different level of administrative, different level of countries, because we need to share data to define global solution for the people.
Great, thanks, Fernando. Marius.
So my pledge would be that I really hope that we can really employ all what we have learned about how to use technology and how to work collectively on a global level, combating COVID-19, use that unity and use these insights to solve some of the other problems that are still there, mainly the green transition. So I hope we really can hang on to this sense of unity. We all into this together, but employ some of the knowledge and the technological means to actually solving some of these other issues that is unfortunately they're still there.
Fantastic. And Theo?
Yeah, so I mean, I very much approach the idea of smart cities from the digital transformation tradition of government digital service with design principles. And so our pledge with our emerging tech charter is to find a new way or a better way to structure and inform the discussion about new technologies and cities and the citizens, and the channels of dialogue and the role of design in that will be absolutely crucial. That you get away from solutionism and more towards citizen-centered design, which is following their needs.
Fantastic. And Philip?
For the last 8 years, my team and I have been working towards one goal, and that is the reconciliation of city and nature, because we have recognized that we as human beings are biological beings and we like to be in a biological environment. We need technology, otherwise we don't get there. And I'm very grateful that you are partners in our pledge sort of for better cities and a better future.
So Kirk,
Fantastic.
I'll just jump in the last few seconds. I'll do a little cloud bubble of our discussion. We talked about purpose-led partnership, purpose-led design, humanity, unity, insights, trust, transparency, global collaboration, and the need to, in the spirit of all of that, fuse city and nature to bring us back to our humanity. I think that theme, these words have really given us a very powerful theme and vision moving forward for the way in which together we're going to come out of this crisis stronger than before, taking the positive lessons learned and avoiding some of the dangers and pitfalls. So it's just my great privilege to have had this hour with you today. Best part of my week. And I hope we can keep the dialogue continuing and toast in person next year in Barcelona.
Fantastic. Thank you, everyone. We're at time. Wonderful discussion. Appreciate
Thank
the
you.
perspective.
Take care.
Hey,
Bye-bye.
And after Barcelona, you can travel to Madrid.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Lo prometo.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.